Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kate Brintworth. I'm the Regional Chief Midwife for London, and I would like to welcome you all to our third webinar in growing our culture of kindness that Capital Midwife has put on. And this week we're talking about the impact of the role of the Professional Midwifery Advocate. Before we launch into that, we have a little video to share with you, and then I'll be handing over to my colleague Clare Capito, who most of you will know through her fantastic work with the PMAs. We do have time at the end of the session for question and answers, so please, throughout all the talks, the video, put your questions in the chat box and then we can pick them up at the end. If you have a question and you're thinking about it, just put it in the chat box, because what we'd like to do is launch straight into the Q&A session at the end and not waste any time. So with no further ado, I will hand over to the team who will put the video on, but you're all very welcome this afternoon.
A bit of a technical hitch. We're coming to it. So apologies, there's no sound, but we might be able to get an opportunity to play this later on. But anyway, I think, are we coming to me now? Yep, okay, lovely. Thank you very much, everyone. Welcome. I'm just going to briefly talk about why we developed why we're trying to grow our culture of kindness. So could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So part of the Capital Midwife programme is to develop various products that enable midwives working in London to progress through their careers and obviously deliver excellent care at all times. And these products have been designed for London midwives, but actually we have had a lot of interest from around the country about the various bits of work that we have been developing. Now, one of the things that we did as in the very early stages of the Capital Midwife programme in 2018, we surveyed midwives to gain their views of working in London. And the report of all their views was listening to London's midwives. And perhaps more worrying, one of the worrying results was about workplace safety, harassment and bullying. And over half the midwives surveyed said they'd experienced personal harassment and bullying, some from patients, so 39% from patients and 30% from colleagues. And only 20% of the midwives felt they could report this. So this actually started us to think about growing our culture of kindness. And last year, 2020, we were going to have our second conference, Capital Midwife Conference, at the end of March. And if you all know, everything had to be cancelled and put on hold due to the pandemic. So we wanted, when we reinvigorated the Capital Midwife programme last November, we decided that we wanted to run a series of webinars to talk about this really important subject about growing our culture of kindness. So next slide, please, Stacey. So we have had two webinars so far. Our first one in January, we had Dr. Henrietta Hughes, who's the National Guardian for Freedom to Speak Up. And in March, we had Gabby Bambridge, who's the consultant obstetrician at Kingston Hospital, and her colleague Vanessa Cole, who's the matron and fetal monitoring lead. And if we go to the next slide, please. So from these two webinars, we have learnt an awful lot. So kindness improves outcomes, and we know that civility is important, and it's important to be nice to each other as the research is out there saying it improves patient safety. And I really like this comment: kindness within and around staff radiates around the department and to those attending maternity services. And you can always tell that when you walk into an area where people are friendly and kind, and you think, right, it's very reassuring. And also importantly, everyone's voices matter. Need to gain confidence to call out bad behaviour and give confidence to those who are less confident or more junior to call out bad behaviour. And we're going to hear a little bit more about that from Mitra later on. And also to reach out for the freedom to speak up guardians without any fears, and they are available in every trust. But also, most importantly, creating an environment where kindness can thrive. And one of the things is to reduce your hierarchy and encouraging everyone to use first names throughout maternity services. And this was from Kingston. They have a wellbeing room that's not just about being soft and fluffy, but it can also accommodate rage. So in other words, if you need to let off steam, it's a safe place to do that rather than in the clinical area. So next slide, please. As part of the growing our culture of kindness, we have asked through our social media for you all to nominate a capital midwife who demonstrates a culture of kindness. So Arizu has nominated Susan Barry. She's a consultant midwife at Imperial, and she says that Susan's kindness and her commitment to change culture where women could have a choice of place of birth. She's kind, caring and committed. And then Georgie Lennon from BHRUT has nominated two midwives. So Jo Ferreira is a fantastic midwife who supports and guides student midwives with her CPF role effortlessly. I know that they appreciate everything you do and they are always singing your praises, and that's lovely. Nice, lovely testament. And then Georgie also nominated Annie McLaughlin, who goes up above and beyond endlessly for the women she cares for. And she works in the Upminster and Cranham midwifery continuity of carer team. So those are three lovely, and we would love you to also nominate further midwives in this culture of kindness theme. That would be brilliant. Thank you. Next slide, please. So why have we chosen the Professional Midwifery Advocate to focus? I personally, having been involved in this since its inception, and Bernie has as well, it's really important. This is a fantastic role that can really impact upon our culture of kindness and the clinical environment in a positive way. And you will hear more. I'm not going to say much more about that. But what I would like to do is introduce you to both our presenters. So could I have the next slide, please? So can I have the next slide, please? A little bit of a pitch. Well, our first presenter is Bernie Nipper, and she's a senior lecturer at the University of Hertfordshire, and she's the lead for the Professional Midwifery Advocate course. And if I just wondered whether we should just give it a couple of seconds to try and see if we can get to the next slide, because I can, and I will just also then say about Mitra, because I actually want to say a little bit more about Bernie. So hopefully we can go to the next slide. But I will just say Mitra Bakhtiari is our next speaker after Bernie, and she works at Imperial as one of the heads of midwifery there, and she's also a professional midwifery advocate. And so actually Bernie is a professional midwifery advocate too. Lost our slides altogether. So, well, I'll just carry on filling for the moment, because I think we'll probably need to have our slides in order to see what we're doing. Okay, lovely, thank you. Thank you, Katie. That's it, lovely. Great, okay, right. Bernie, here we go. So you qualified as a nurse in 1986 and as a midwife in 1988. I've worked with Bernie because I worked at Barking, Havering and Redbridge many moons ago. And Bernie has extensive knowledge and experience in all areas of midwifery, and we worked together as well in the local supervising authority before it was disestablished. And I think this is a really powerful statement that Bernie makes, and it demonstrates her passion about the role of not only of the PMA, but her wanting to make things better and develop a culture of kindness. So Bernie says here, I've been a victim of and witnessed incivility on many occasions throughout my career. It harms organisations and the well-being of staff, and it's never acceptable. I want to empower the next generation of midwives to have the courage to speak out against and address poor attitude and behaviour. Fantastic, very powerful. And next slide, please. And Mitra, I realise I probably didn't get your job title right. So Mitra, you are the Deputy Divisional Director of Nursing and Midwifery and PMA at Imperial College Healthcare Trust. Mitra is a gynaecology nurse and registered midwife with over 25 years of experience in clinical practice and management and service improvement and clinical supervision. And we've worked together many moons ago as well. And also human resources in and across a number of maternity services and community and hospitals. And she's a Florence Nightingale Scholar, professional coach, freedom to speak up, a safety guardian and specialist advisor to the CQC. Mitra says here, empowering staff to recognise and control microaggressions within the workplace is a real opportunity to positively influence workplace civility. And as PMAs, we must develop skills in becoming active bystanders. So without much ado, I'm going to hand you over to Bernie, and she'll hand over to Mitra. Thank you very much, Bernie.
Lovely, thank you, Claire. Thank you for the lovely introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to the webinar this afternoon. So as those of you who aren't already aware, I'm just going to provide you with an overview of what the A-equip model is and also the role of the PMA. So as many of you probably are aware, the midwifery supervision ended in March 2017 now. It doesn't seem that long ago. And then we have the new model. Thanks, Stacey. And the new model is the A-equip model, which stands for Advocating for Education and Quality Improvement. And prior to the implementation of this new model, there was a considerable amount of work done in the background to organise and what the model would look like, and various stakeholders were involved in developing the new model, and that ranged from educationalists, NHS England staff, midwives, old supervisors and midwives, head of midwifery, and lots of other people were involved. And actually it was piloted before it was implemented. It was piloted in several trusts across the country. So the new model originates actually from a model that health visitors use. So it's based on that model really, and that model was called Proctor's model. And as you can see from the slide, there are 4 different elements attached to the A-equip model. And those 4 elements really, I'm not going to go into them in any great detail, but the first one is the normative function. And really what the normative function does is that supports staff to develop their ability and their effectiveness in their everyday clinical roles. The next one is education, and really education speaks for itself. That's about focusing on the developing midwives and staff's knowledge and skills, and it's also about enabling them to develop their leadership skills, and actually it's also linked to revalidation. Quite often in different organisations, the PMAs are also involved in the revalidation process. The next one is personal action for quality improvement, and that really aims to ensure that all midwives are familiar with their their roles and how they can contribute to quality improvement in their organisation. And it's really about midwives feeling empowered to make changes in the clinical environment. And by doing that, that's seen as them being advocates for their women and contributing to women's experience. I think the days where you know, all new innovations and initiatives come from the top down, those days have gone. And this new model, the A-Equip model, and the role of the PMA enables PMAs really to empower even junior midwives to take quality improvement initiatives forward. And then probably the most important aspect, I think, of the A-Equip model, and actually the role of the PMA, is the restorative clinical supervision, which is also you might hear it called RCS. And what that does is that focuses on addressing the emotional needs and the well-being of staff. And it's also about helping them with resilience, developing resilience. It gives staff space and the opportunity to discuss any personal and actually work-related issues that they've got in that confidential space. And it's about enabling them to come up with solutions to their own problems. So it's not like the old days where some of you remember, where supervisors of midwives would, you know, and actually it's our nature, I think, in our nature as healthcare professionals to try and help people wherever we can. So this, the role of the PMA in relation to RCS is about enabling those staff members to come up with the solutions to their own problems. And by providing that safe environment and that support as well through RCS, it's been shown to reduce stress levels, reduce burnout. It also improves retention rate as well. And I think this it's proven to be really important, especially during the times that we find ourselves in with the pandemic. And a lot of the PMAs and a lot of organisations have had to think of alternative ways of delivering RCS and delivering that support to their staff because they've not been able to do it face to face. And actually many organisations have extended that arm of support to other healthcare professionals like nurses, their nursing colleagues, and other members of the multidisciplinary team. Next slide, please, Stacey. So this is just an overview of the role of the Professional Midwifery Advocate, also known as the PMA. So to become a PMA, midwives need to have successfully completed a PMA preparation course at an approved university. And actually that's been extended now, not just to midwives, but also nurses. There's now a new Professional Nurse Advocate module and training out there as well. PMAs can be employed as full-time or as on a sessional basis, and their role is to deploy the A-Equip model within their organisation. And it might look different, it might vary, their role might vary from one organisation to another organisation, because normally the employer chooses the approach which best fits the needs of their organisation. So just going through, these are some of the aspects of the PMA's role. They support midwives in delivering good care to their women. Again, they empower midwives to take responsibility of improving the quality of care that they provide. And as I said previously, quality improvement is an intrinsic part of every midwife's role, whether they're a band 5 midwife or whether they're a band 8 midwife. And it's about PMAs empowering those junior midwives if they have an idea that will improve practice, will improve care or the experience that we give to the women. It's about encouraging them to speak up and have the courage to take that idea forward and support them as well. Again, PMAs are involved in education, so getting midwives to think about their career development and also an interest in leadership roles as well. And as I said previously, the main focus, I think, of the role in most organisations is that the PMA focuses on supporting midwives through emotionally difficult and challenging times, and they do that through RCS as well. And as we know, especially during these times during the current pandemic, many midwives have had a lot of additional trauma and challenges to deal with. And the PMAs are seen as leaders and role models, and they're visible in the workplace, and many of them will walk around their various units. They provide one-to-one restorative clinical supervision sessions and group supervision sessions to their staff. Some of them have even been around with tea trolleys and making sure that their staff are fed and watered during the pandemic. And also being visible means that the PMAs are actually well placed to identify and address poor attitude and behaviour in the workplace, and to address incivility, and therefore promote a culture of kindness. And they can also support staff. I think it's really important that they support staff to speak up about unacceptable behaviour, and encourage staff not just to be the bystander and to bury their heads, but to actually do something about it. As incivility, I think we all agree, is something that we all need to actively address. So thank you very much, Stacey. Next slide, and I'd like to hand over to Mitra, and Mitra will provide you with some information on some work she's been doing about the active bystander.
Thank you, Bernie, and thank you for inviting me for the introduction, Claire, and good afternoon, everyone. So before I start my presentation, I would just like to ask you all to reflect on an occasion at work when you witnessed an inappropriate behaviour that you found unacceptable. And by not acceptable, I mean is a behaviour that wasn't quite in line with the trust values. Now I'm going to give you 30 seconds and then I'll come back to you. Okay, I think that was just about 30 seconds and we will come back to that a bit later. So often at work you may witness behaviours around you that can make you feel quite uncomfortable. We've talked about behaviours that we actually refer to as microaggressions. So it could be something that is said that is to you or someone else. It could be a gesture. It could be a change of tone. It could be eye rolling, and we often on Teams and you notice certain behaviours that again makes you uncomfortable. Ignoring someone's question, some derogatory comment that we've passed. And I think the most common that we all know is certain behaviours of certain colleagues that has become learned bad behaviour, that it just seems that it's tolerated and no one's doing anything about it. So when these things happen, you may choose to say something and be an active bystander, or you may do nothing and be a passive bystander. And it is not uncommon to be a passive bystander. It's very well researched as to why we don't intervene. And this could be that you thinking no one else is doing it, why should I? Or is it just me? Or assuming someone else will say something and the moment will pass. And you don't actually want to get involved because it might just has a negative impact on your reputation. Perhaps if it's, we've talked about hierarchy, if it's something that is coming from your perhaps line manager. And again, thinking that it could just be you. So could I have the next slide, please? So this is what active bystander is. So the active bystander steps in and make a very safe intervention, and they actually act as an ally to someone whose that behaviour is towards, and gives a signal that actually there's been an unacceptable behaviour displayed here. And ultimately what you would do is you contribute to controlling that microaggression within the workplace, perhaps if it was in a meeting and that meeting was going to happen again. Now, the reason we talk about active bystander is because this is not about being a hero, and by no means this is easy. So it is important to develop skills around it so we can do it well. And the reason we must learn to do it well is because there is a huge amount of evidence to suggest that if you just do that, it literally shifts the boundaries of what's considered as acceptable behaviour. And that's what we're talking about here. So it's important. So at Imperial, we have an active bystander training as a standard that is offered to all staff. And really the key message is that poor behaviour must be challenged and called out. The training provides practical tools to help you move to what I think is a growth zone, where when you call something out, it creates a few moments of awkwardness. So to me, the training will normalise to encourage those few moments of awkwardness that potentially can stop a behaviour that could have a long-term impact on someone's work experience. So simple steps, but has a huge impact on diffusing poor behaviour. So could I have the next slide, please? Okay, so in the context of what we've discussed already, I'm just going to wrap it up because we've talked about the statistics. This is about maternity safety agenda. So and so not to repeat the statistics we've already mentioned, which is the 30% of midwives report poor behaviour from colleagues and managers, and only 20% of them actually feel like they can report it. But I think that the statistics that I wanted to draw your attention to is that 60% of students in any setting experience incivility. And evidently, staff who are subjected to incivility, in my opinion, they don't necessarily engage well, they don't train well, and potentially they do not practice well either. And therefore that could have an impact on healthcare outcomes. And so the second context is that we encourage within a safe culture for staff to speak up. And more importantly, when they speak up, they're supported when they do so. And lastly, we've mentioned here and I think Wendy mentioned in her, Wendy Olowola, in her previous seminar that we are seen as PMAs as civility leaders to promote a kind culture. So could I have the next slide, please? Okay, so these are practically some of the, so this is what happens actually. So you see an unacceptable behavior, so you may choose to take a direct action. So by that, I mean, in fact, if you have situations where you have terms of reference, you may actually decide that you will tie into terms of reference as you would have an active bystander who would monitor behaviours, so almost like a behavioural contract, so everyone is clear what's expected. And then you choose to take a direct action. So now remember, in taking direct actions, you take in responsibility yourself. So always refer to as I. I is a very powerful zone to be. For example, if you are talking about clinical incidents, you can say, can I suggest that we do not mention staff names? Because that's not what we're doing. We're just reviewing a clinical incident. We should be taking individual names and designations out of it. If you see a puzzled face, you might just say, can I help you understand? I can see you're not quite clear. So these are just some of the examples, and when you go for an active bystander training, they give you far more examples to help you with a direct action. Now you may want to, could I have the next slide, please? So you may want to, actually, no, if you just remain on this slide, sorry. So you may actually want to distract. So distraction is when you are, you notice something, you may just want to say, can we stick to the agenda? Or I'm not clear what I've just heard, can you clarify? So that's the kind of distraction. In one-to-one meetings, I've actually seen people spilling a glass of water just to break the momentum where that behaviour is ongoing. You may want to delegate, so you may want to refer to somebody else to speak about it. You may want to go to Freedom to Speak Up, as mentioned in the previous presentations. You may want to go to your boss, or you may want to go to your union. And these are classic examples of perhaps safeguarding, that you may not want to just straight away do something about it. And then you may want to delay it. If it's something that you're not quite sure about, so you want to just maybe go back to the person and clarify what was mentioned, and you said that in that meeting, can I just clarify what I've heard was correct? Never underestimate or overanalyze a bad behaviour. So bad behaviour is a bad behaviour and needs to be called out. And actually the process of calling it out, you may help that individual, because sometimes these behaviours are not classic to behaviours that you know from someone. So you will actually help that individual reflect on their behaviour. And it's never too late to act. So the beauty about active bystander training is that there's always something you can do later if you don't want to do something about it straight away. And could I have the next slide, please? Right, so these are some of the things you need to consider. So safe intervention is a skill. So it's important that you, with training, with practice, you make it the culture of norm. And again, as PMAs, you're in an ideal opportunity to do that. Speaking up is everyone's responsibility, so we're not just asking you to do that. And also remember, people who experience put downs are often marginalized, and they need allies. These are people that you may know of, or is someone that you sense that actually it's not the first time they've been exposed to that behavior. So that's why that's why they can't really say anything or defend themselves. And there's a huge amount of evidence within the victim support. If you ask victims, they always say, if only someone said something or did something and no one said anything. And also, I think that this is really most important thing, is be aware of your own cognitive biases, manage your own unconscious biases, understand reasons why microaggressions may happen. It may be completely unintentional, but it could also be intentional and may have even more serious reasons, and understand how they could actually manifest within the workplace. And again, something that is very close to my heart is really increasing your own knowledge. There's never enough to know and learn about why microaggressions happen. And it's something that I like, and I encourage you to read it, is by Dunning-Kruger, who talks about a hallmark of intelligence is to always learn about things that you don't know. I have mentioned the reverse mentoring in previous my previous talks about active bystander. Do not underestimate the value of having a reverse mentor, just to help you walk in the shoes of some of these people who are marginalized in society. And I think it's very important. I think Claire was very passionate that I mentioned this. It's about self-care. So I refer to the ABC of psychological first aid. So A is being aware of your own stress factors and self-compassion, and normalize your stresses. Don't make excuses for why you're stressed. Understand it and connect with it. Establish a work-life balance. Some of us are working from home now. Manage your team's call. Remember, your hours still 7.5 hours. So if you're working from home, don't feel like you need to sit at the computer from 8 to 8 at night. So manage your breaks, manage moving around, manage to move yourself from your desk to have your lunch break. And most importantly, connect with people, connect with your social supports. Again, agile working from home disconnects you from the normal environment that we know and love. So you need to find a way of connecting with people, even if you work from home. If you can, you may just want to touch base with people at work. And consider always, this is about workplace. This is about learning from skills within the policies and procedures. And if you are calling behaviours out, be kind and don't be confrontational or bossy. So with the skills of being an active bystander doesn't give you the right to be bossy. If you've understood that, that is incorrect. This is about being compassionate. And always remember, by saying nothing, we're actually making it okay for poor behaviour to continue. So can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so my next slide, I think, wraps up what we've talked about today. It's a 2 quotes to say, and I'm going to just read it out. In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And sorry, what hurts the victim the most is not the cruelty of the oppressor, but the silence of the bystander. So before I finish, and I think that will be my last slide, is I want you to go back to the behaviour that you thought about before. Think about it, and I'm going to give you another 30 seconds. Thank you. And if I move to the last slide, which I believe there's some references for you that I've actually used to put this presentation together. And I believe that's the end of my presentations, and I believe we're doing questions later. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mitra, and thank you to Bernie for 2 excellent presentations. I think they've really touched in on something about culture here. Culture is so much driven by these small interactions, the little bits of behaviour that we experience on a day-to-day basis that make someone feel able to challenge a decision, to have a conversation about something that might be awkward. And it's very, very easy to walk away from those things. And I think with the active intervention of the PMAs who seek to be in that space, and with this bystander training, I think the 2 things make a really important difference to how we are trying to challenge culture in our maternity services. I just wondered if there were any questions in the chat box. We're aware that we think that there's been some technical difficulties. We've had some people message us to say they found it difficult to join. So if you want to text questions, there's a number on the screen. So that's 077 333 84512. So please text your questions across to the team, and they will be able to ask those questions across of everyone. Mitra, I was really struck by your bystander work that you were talking about, and I just wondered, for someone who might be feeling a little bit intimidated, you know, band 5 on the Labour board, band 7 who's been there 150 years, I count myself as one of those. I remember being that band 7, and you know, that power imbalance can make it feel very uncertain. I wondered if you've got some things that people might do to perhaps help them feel confident and courageous to step into this space, because that power differential can be a significant barrier.
Absolutely, thank you for that question, Kate. And I think this is about what we talked about before, being allies. I think we need to build skills on being really good allies, because we do know that people don't speak up, they're frightened to speak up. And I think it's important to increase our visibility. PMAs are in a fantastic position just to keep your eye to the ground and witness behaviours, and actually just have a very easy, comfortable conversation. Are you okay?
Yeah.
And just by saying, are you okay, just actually gives a message to that person, I have noticed that you're not okay. So because I think the first thing is that it's not easy for people to speak up, and we've talked about boards, that you actually put names on the boards because people don't come up, and just by glancing through a phone number for, I don't know, whether it be freedom to speak up, whether it be your union, it kind of triggers something that actually they're going to talk to someone about it, and it will have a domino effect. The more that we do it, the easier it becomes. And I will give you a real example. We have had a concern raised within a cohort of our student midwives, and it's something that they actually said that they don't want to say anything because they're in middle of their training. So what we have done is we've actually increased our walkabouts. We've literally stood around to just watch the behaviours, because some of it was actually at handovers, at one-to-one between their mentors or with the midwife they were taken over from. So we're just keeping an eye on that and monitoring it, and by doing that you're giving yourself assurance that actually things are improving or not, as the case may be. And the other thing also we're doing is that we are talking to a group of students about active bystander. We talk about terms of reference at the meetings with behavioural contracts. So just a few things to actually raise the awareness of the types of things you will do to monitor bad behaviour and what we're doing about it. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Mitra. I think that was a really comprehensive answer, and I think there was lots in there for someone who might be feeling like they're starting on this journey. But certainly gives you, I think creating that environment is so important though, like you say, where people are around, and we need leadership to challenge those bad behaviours, to say actually this is the new norm, but not calling bad behaviours and say why are you behaving badly, but that are you okay is a really powerful question, isn't it, to someone, to disarm them and say, are you okay? Suddenly the person has to think, oh, am I okay? Yes. What's going on here, to take a step back, because sometimes maternity can be a really, really high pressured environment, and when you're under pressure you tend to fall back to shortcuts which aren't always the ones that make people feel better. And I'm just going to pass on to Claire, who had a bit of a scenario that she wanted to talk about.
Right, thank you. Thanks, Kate. This is actually, I was going to give this to Bernie to talk about, but in fact I never got it written up. But when I was teaching on the PMA course, one of the PMA students said to me, I didn't know about the word civility until I came to one of the PMA meetings. And in many ways, we haven't sometimes named these behaviours, but she said, because she knew that name, she was working in her clinical setting and came across a very upset student midwife who, when she said, are you okay, said, well, not really. And when she explained what had happened, she'd actually taken someone, a mum, up to theatres and to an area that she wasn't familiar with, and had walked her up because she didn't need, in her mind, she didn't need a chair or a bed, or she might have wheeled her in a chair. When they arrived at the theatre, the theatre nurse checking her in said, well, where's her bed? But the way she said it was probably not very kind, and it was a bit of a surprise for the student to be spoken to like that. And so she apologised. But anyway, when the discussion was taking place between the PMA and the student, PMA said, this is what this is called is incivility. You've experienced an act of incivility, but you can do something about it. And so and she said, would you like to do something about it? And she said yes. And she said, well, simply we, together I can support you, and we can go back to theatres, and we can very gently just say to the nurse how her words made you feel. And the student nurse was up for it. Student midwife, sorry, was up for it. So together they went up to the theatre, and well, the nurse was obviously devastated because she hadn't realised that what she had said had impacted. And I think sometimes people just need to be reminded that sometimes we talk in a way that we don't really mean to be unkind, but it's just the way we've got used to speaking. So it's really important that people are reminded that sometimes, you know, quite harsh words can really impact very negatively. And I know how it makes me feel if someone criticises me, that I sort of clench up in my stomach. There's a very physiological response to you know, someone not being very kind or being overly critical.